Everyone fled from the most feared giant wolf of the kingdom, except the Omega Maid, who touched him without fear. Mist hung over the kingdom like a forgotten memory, curling through the forests and settling over the cobblestone streets. It carried a chill that sank into the bones of even the bravest knights, whispering tales of the monster that roamed beyond the castle walls. Few dared to venture into the deep woods, and fewer still returned. The villagers called him the giant wolf, a beast of enormous size, eyes like molten amber, and a presence so terrifying that even the hardiest hunters trembled in fear. The wolf had once been a prince. Born into royalty, he had inherited nothing but his father's crown and a curse placed upon him by a sorceress whose heart had been broken long ago. That curse had twisted his body and soul, casting him into a form of fang and fur, strength and savagery. And in that monstrous form he had become the shadow that haunted the kingdom, feared by all, avoided by all, except one. In the castle kitchens, beneath the flickering lamplight and the smell of baked bread, a young maid moved silently. Her hands were quick, her steps quiet, and her eyes ever watchful. She had been called many things in the castle: timid, unremarkable, obedient. But inside her heart lived a courage no one had noticed. The Omega Maid, as some whispered, for she carried an inexplicable calm in the presence of chaos. That evening, as twilight bled into the forest, a distant howl sliced through the air. Servants froze mid-task. Dogs whimpered. The earth seemed to shiver beneath its own roots. The giant wolf had appeared on the edge of the forest, massive and dreadful, his fur glinting silver under the dying sun. People scattered instantly, doors slammed, and torches flickered as if afraid to illuminate the sight. The maid paused. Her hand lingered on the wooden counter, then left it entirely. She didn't move away. Something drew her beyond the safety of the castle walls, toward the darkness where others saw only death. The wolf's gaze swept the clearing. He expected panic, fear, the usual retreating forms. Instead, he saw a small figure stepping forward, a human. Alone, unafraid. The air tightened between them, thick with tension, unspoken words, and the electric spark of curiosity. "You shouldn't be here," the wolf's voice rumbled, a growl curling like smoke from his throat. It was more than a sound. It was a force that pushed against the very air. The maid did not flinch. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. His eyes narrowed. Few humans had ever spoken to him without trembling. None had dared approach. Her fearlessness was a blade that cut through the layers of rage and solitude that had grown around him. The wolf tilted his massive head, sniffing the air between them. He smelled the tang of bread and herbs, the faint scent of iron from the kitchen knives, and beneath it all, something cleaner, gentler, courage. The maid took another step, extending her hand. Her fingers brushed the thick fur of his shoulder. She felt the heat of his body. The tension coiled like a spring beneath the fur, and yet she held on. The wolf recoiled, a growl vibrating from deep in his chest. His instincts screamed to lash out, to rend, to tear. And yet, he didn't. He couldn't. Something in her touch reached a memory he had long buried, a fleeting moment of human warmth, a hand held in trust, a promise once broken. "You are different," he said, though the words sounded foreign to him. Even in human form, speaking had been a challenge. Now, as beast, it felt almost impossible. "I only see what is here," she replied simply. Her eyes met his molten gaze without turning away. "Not the monster everyone fears, just you." No one had ever called him by his true self. Not the wolf, not the monster. And yet she had. The forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. Leaves trembled without wind, and even the distant rivers seemed to hush its flow. The wolf stepped closer, cautious but compelled. Each movement carried the weight of centuries of fear, loneliness, and anger. And still, he did not strike. "You could be killed," he said finally, his voice lower, tinged with confusion. "Why come here?" The maid shrugged slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I do not run from what frightens me," she said. I want to understand it." Her words were strange, like a melody heard only once, but impossible to forget. The wolf's jaw flexed, teeth catching the dying light. He wanted to roar, to frighten her into fleeing, but a small, fragile part of him resisted. A part he had not felt in countless years. "You are brave, or foolish," he said, his growl softening. "No one dares come near me." "I do not care for fear," the maid whispered. "Only truth." And in that moment the first thread of trust wove between them, delicate, invisible, yet unbreakable. But the world beyond the forest did not share their quiet. From the castle balcony, a shadow shifted. A figure draped in dark velvet watched the interaction with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. The nobles had long whispered that the wolf's presence was a threat to the throne. Now they had proof that someone dared to cross him. The maid did not notice the eyes watching her. She focused entirely on the wolf, on his golden, intelligent gaze, on the way the muscles beneath his fur tensed and relaxed under her touch. She felt the weight of centuries of sorrow in him, a loneliness so vast it seemed to echo in the wind. You are not like the others," he said finally, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "Why do you touch me?" "I do not see a monster," she replied. "I see a being trapped. And I cannot leave you here alone." The wolf's fur bristled at her words, though not in anger. He had never been approached like this, never with empathy. His form shifted slightly, enormous claws pressing into the earth, heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He wanted to reject her, to vanish into the darkness, to let her live without risk. And yet, the courage in her gaze held him in place. A howl broke the silence, distant and mournful. The wolf stiffened. It was the call of others like him, or perhaps a reminder of the curse that bound him. The maid flinched only slightly, then reached out and touched his snout. Her hand was small against the scale of his head, but the gesture carried calm, assurance, and trust. For the first time in centuries, the wolf lowered his head to meet her touch. The sound that rumbled from his chest was not only a growl, but something softer, almost a purr, a sound of recognition, of connection, of fleeting hope. The shadow on the balcony moved again, deliberate and silent. A plan was forming. The castle would not allow this bond to exist. A hunter would be sent, a spell might be cast, and the kingdom itself could be drawn into the forest by fear and superstition. But for now the maid and the wolf remained alone. Two beings in the dying light, drawn together by courage, curiosity, and a strange sense of destiny. She did not speak of the danger, nor did he. Words were unnecessary. Their bond was unspoken, fragile, and infinitely powerful. As night fell, the wolf let out a low howl, not of warning, but of longing. The sound traveled over the misty trees, echoing into the kingdom, carrying with it a message that only she seemed to hear. "I am here. I am waiting." The maid, still standing at the forest's edge, felt a shiver of fear and exhilaration. The wolf was more than a monster. He was a being of sorrow, strength, and memory. And she could feel the weight of what had been lost, what had been cursed, and what might yet be saved. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the eyes of the castle watcher glinted with malice and intrigue. This encounter would not remain a secret. The kingdom's whispers, the noble schemes, and the darkness of the curse were all converging. But for now, for this brief fleeting moment, there was only the wolf, the maid, and the quiet promise of a bond that defied fear. And the question lingered, carried by the wind: who would truly survive the encounter when courage met the cursed shadows of the past? The forest breathed around them, thick with shadows and the scent of wet earth. Moonlight pierced the canopy in thin silver shafts, illuminating the clearing where the wolf waited. His golden eyes reflected the pale light, watching every movement, every ripple in the air, as though he could read the thoughts of the wind itself. The maid approached, her steps light but steady. Her heart beat with a strange mix of fear and certainty. She had been drawn to him once, and that pull had not faded. The villagers might scream and the castle might plan, but she could not ignore the creature who had stirred something long buried in her soul. "You returned," the wolf said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against the trees. "I could not stay away," she replied, her gaze meeting his without hesitation. I do not want to leave you alone." He tilted his massive head, unsure whether her words were bravery or foolishness. He had spent centuries avoiding humans, watching their terror, their hatred, their weapons. And yet here she was, offering something he had thought impossible: trust. "You risk much," he said. "If anyone sees you here—" His growl lingered, warning and curiosity entwined. "I know," she said softly, "but I would rather risk than stand idle." For a long moment, silence held them. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening, waiting. Then slowly he stepped forward, lowering his great head so that she could reach him. Her hands traced the thick fur along his snout, across his shoulders as if learning him through touch. "You feel human," he said, the words strange on his tongue. "But you're not afraid. Why?" She smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair from her eyes. "Because I see you. Not the curse, not the fear, only you." The wolf's ears twitched. Few humans had ever spoken to him with such clarity, such honesty. Most screamed or fled. Most carried the stench of judgment and fear. But she carried neither. She carried something else: warmth, curiosity, and courage. Over the following nights, the maid returned. She learned to move through the forest quietly, guided by moonlight and the whispered directions of the wolf's deep, resonant growls. He began to teach her the ways of the woods, how to listen to the wind, how to sense movement in the shadows, how to survive in a place where few dared to tread. And she, in return, taught him something he had long forgotten: the feel of a gentle touch, the comfort of quiet conversation, the hope that perhaps even a cursed soul could find peace. They communicated in gestures and glances at first: a nod, a flick of a paw, the tilt of a head. Slowly words came, hesitant, careful, weighted with meaning. He spoke of the curse that had bound him, of the night the sorceress had marked him, and of the loneliness that had become his constant companion. "I remember when I was human," he confessed one night, his voice trembling with something he had not felt in ages. "I remember laughter, warmth, the feeling of belonging. But it was taken from me." "And yet you survive," she said, her hand resting lightly on his snout. "And I see it in you. You are more than the curse." Her words touched something deep within him. The anger, the loneliness, the hunger, all softened for a moment under her gaze. He lowered himself to the forest floor, massive paws folded beneath him, letting her presence settle beside him like a protective shield. But the kingdom beyond the forest did not remain idle. Whispers had begun to spread among the nobles and servants alike, tales of a woman who dared to approach the cursed wolf. Fear mixed with fascination, and soon the rumor reached the ears of a hunter skilled in magic and steel. His orders were simple: capture or eliminate the creature. The maid did not know this yet. She only knew the wolf and the strange, dangerous bond that had grown between them. "You trust me," he said one evening, the moonlight catching the curve of his fur. "Do not know if I can return that trust fully. My nature is different, dangerous." "I trust you because I believe in you," she replied. "I do not fear what you are, only what you cannot yet forgive yourself for." Because he growled softly, not in anger, but in thought. No human had ever spoken to him like this. His curse had made him violent, feared, untouchable, and yet she touched him with her words as surely as her hands had touched his fur. One night, as they sat together near the banks of a small, silvered stream, the wolf shifted, not fully into human form, but partially, a strange blend of beast and man. His claws shortened, his posture straightened slightly, and his golden eyes flickered with the light of memory. The change was painful, and a low growl escaped him. You can change," she whispered, reaching out to steady him. "I can," he said, voice strained. "But it hurts. It always does. The human part fights with the beast. I fear it will destroy me. You are not alone," she said, pressing her hand against his chest. "Not while I am here." Her touch seemed to calm him, if only slightly. And in that moment the wolf realized that perhaps the curse was not only a prison. Perhaps it was also a path that could lead him back to something he had long forgotten: hope. But their peace was fragile. One evening as she approached, a sudden shimmer of light appeared through the trees. The hunter had arrived, magical runes glowing on the stones he carried, his intentions clear. He would not allow this bond to continue. The wolf bared his teeth, low and threatening, but he was weakened by the partial transformation and the toll of his own curse. The hunter began to chant, drawing a circle of binding around him. The air crackled with energy, and the forest itself seemed to bristle in response. "Run!" the wolf barked, his voice raw and urgent. The maid hesitated. Her instinct was to flee, yet her heart refused to leave him. She stepped forward, hands glowing faintly with a warmth she did not understand. Perhaps a gift of courage, or something older, something tied to the forest itself. The hunter's eyes narrowed. "Do not interfere, girl," he warned, his voice like steel against the night. "This creature is cursed. Touch him, and you join his fate." "I will not leave him," she said firmly. The wolf lunged, snapping at the edges of the magical circle. Sparks flew, illuminating the forest in violent flashes of light and shadow. He roared, a sound of pain and rage that shook the trees. The maid stepped closer, her hands on his fur, her presence steadying him in ways magic could not. For a fleeting moment the wolf's golden eyes softened, and the faintest trace of a human smile touched his lips. In that instant, they were no longer hunter and prey, cursed beast and mortal maid. They were two souls bound by trust and courage, defying the fear that had ruled their lives. But the danger had not passed. The hunter's circle began to shrink, and the magic's pull grew stronger. The wolf's strength alone might not be enough to break it, and the maid knew, in the deepest part of her heart, that her next action would define them both. "You must trust me," the wolf growled, his voice strained. "Everything depends on it." "One wrong move." "I trust you," she said again. And she stepped fully into the circle, hand pressed to his shoulder, heart brimming with fear and resolve. A sudden explosion of light filled the clearing, blinding and intense. The wolf roared, struggling against the binding, and the maid felt a surge of something ancient, powerful and protective flowing through her. She did not understand how she could influence the magic, but she did not question it. She only held on, silently willing the beast beside her to survive. When the light dimmed, the wolf was panting, exhausted, his fur singed in places. But the binding had broken. The hunter staggered backward, shocked, unable to comprehend how a simple maid had disrupted powerful magic meant to control the cursed creature. The maid knelt beside the wolf, breathing heavily, her hands still resting against him. "Are you safe?" she asked. "For now," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "But they will not stop. The kingdom will not allow this. And yet I cannot let you go." Her hand lingered, warm against his fur. Her courage had saved him, and now their bond had grown stronger, deeper. But with the kingdom's gaze upon them and danger closing in from all sides, neither of them could ignore the truth. Their trust, their connection, was forbidden, and every moment together carried the weight of risk. The wolf lowered his massive head, letting her touch calm him. "You have no idea what you have done," he said quietly, "or what you have awakened." "I do," she whispered, "and I do not regret it." As they sat in the clearing, The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the echoes of distant footsteps. Noble conspiracies, fearful villagers, and the relentless hunter who would not rest until the curse was enforced. The forest held its breath, waiting, and the bond between the wolf and the maid, fragile and powerful, flickered like the light of a single candle against an endless night. The forest had grown darker, thicker, as though it were alive with the secrets of the kingdom. The wolf moved silently, each step deliberate, muscles coiled beneath his enormous frame. His golden eyes scanned the shadows, alert for every sound, every whisper. Something was wrong. He could feel it, a ripple of unease that pressed against the edges of his mind. Beside him, the maid walked with steady courage, unaware of the full danger approaching. Her hands were clasped together, her heart steady, yet she sensed the change in the air. The forest seemed quieter than usual. The animals hushed, as if aware of a predator beyond even the wolf's notice. "You feel it too," she whispered, her voice soft, almost a thread among the towering trees. He nodded, low and cautious. "Yes. There are eyes upon us that do not belong here." The hunter was only the beginning. The memory of the previous night's attack lingered in him. The bright circle of magic, the strain in his limbs, the helplessness he had felt despite his immense strength. The maid had saved him, but it had not gone unnoticed. Nobles who hungered for power and influence had spies in every corner. Soon whispers of the wolf's presence and the maid's bravery would reach the throne itself. They had found a small glade, hidden by ancient trees and the veil of mist, and for a fleeting moment the world felt still. The wolf lay down, massive paws folded beneath him, and allowed the maid to sit beside him. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, offering calm and warmth. "You are different," he said quietly, the growl in his voice softened by a strange uncertainty. "No one has ever stayed like this. Not even when I was human." She smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Maybe it is because you have always been more than the monster they see. Maybe they just cannot understand what courage looks like." He let out a low rumble, neither growl nor purr, but something between. There was truth in her words, though he could not fully embrace it. His curse was not only a form, it was a shadow over his mind, a constant reminder of what he had lost and could never regain. "I fear," he admitted softly, "that my curse will always follow me. That even with you I will only bring danger." "You do not bring danger," she said firmly. "The danger comes from those who cannot see beyond fear. I see you." That is enough. Her words, simple yet unwavering, struck something deep within him. For centuries he had known only solitude, only the echo of his own despair. Yet here was a human who understood, or at least tried to, and it unsettled him in a way he could not name. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint sound that made his ears twitch. The maid looked up, following his gaze into the shadows. "Someone comes," he said, his voice tense. Before either of them could move, a figure emerged from the mist. A hunter, cloaked and masked, stepped into the glade. Magical runes glimmered along the edges of his robes, faint light shimmering in the darkness. He held a staff that pulsed with energy, designed not merely to wound, but to control. "Step aside, girl," the hunter said, voice sharp and unyielding. "This creature is bound by curse. Leave, or you share its fate." "I will not leave," the maid replied calmly, her hand brushing the wolf's fur for reassurance. "Not now. Not ever." The wolf growled low, muscles tensing. He had faced hunters before, had fought and fled, yet the sight of this one, combined with the looming presence of the maid, brought a strange mixture of fury and protectiveness. He stepped forward, enormous frame casting a shadow over the hunter. The hunter raised his staff, chanting words that twisted the air with magic. The runes glowed brighter, forming a circle of binding that began to shrink around the wolf. Sparks of energy danced like angry fireflies, illuminating the glade in harsh, unnatural light. "Hold still," the wolf growled, his voice raw with effort. He tried to fight the magic, but it pulled at him like chains, tight and unyielding. The curse that had twisted his form made him vulnerable to such spells, no matter his strength. The maid did not move away. Instead, she stepped closer, hands hovering over the glowing runes. She did not know how, but she felt something stir in the forest, something old and powerful responding to her courage. Her hand brushed the edge of the circle, a warmth flowing through her that she had never felt before. It was not magic she had studied. It was something older, tied to the forest and the wolf himself. "You will not take him," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. The hunter faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his hidden eyes. The wolf's growl deepened, vibrating through the ground, shaking leaves from the branches above. Together they resisted, beast and human, courage and strength merging into a force the hunter had not anticipated. For a brief, shining moment the glade was still. The energy of the circle faltered, sputtering, as if recognizing the bond between the wolf and the maid. Then, with a final surge of effort, the wolf lunged, breaking the magical barrier with sheer force. Sparks flew, lighting the glade in white-hot flashes, and the hunter stumbled back, his plan undone. The wolf collapsed, exhausted, muscles trembling under the weight of his cursed form. The maid knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his fur, feeling the pulse of life beneath the coarse hair. "You are safe for now," she whispered. He lifted his head slightly, golden eyes locking with hers. "For now," he repeated, voice hoarse. "But danger follows us. The kingdom, the nobles, they will not stop. And yet, I cannot let you go." Her hand lingered against his massive shoulder, warm and steady. She did not speak, for words were not necessary. Her presence, her courage, had already spoken. The wolf shifted, letting a part of his human form emerge, just enough for her to see the curve of his jaw, the sharpness of his eyes, the faint trace of the man he had been. The transformation was painful, muscles tightening, fur receding, yet he allowed it for her. The maid reached out, brushing her fingers across his cheek, feeling the warmth beneath the beastly exterior. "You are more than I imagined," she said softly. "Not the curse, not the monster. You." He exhaled slowly, the sound mingling growl and sigh.
"And you. You are unlike any human I have known."
Brave, bold, reckless perhaps, but brave. Their bond had deepened. The forest, once a place of shadows and fear, now held something else. Trust, understanding, and a fragile hope that even a cursed soul might find redemption. But peace never lasted long. From the edges of the glade, movement stirred. Another figure, cloaked and silent, watched from the darkness. Unlike the hunter, this one did not approach openly. Yet their presence was undeniable, a shadow pressing against the light of the clearing. The wolf sensed it immediately, his ears flattened, muscles coiling, eyes narrowing. He knew the forest's whispers, the subtle signs of intrusion, and this presence was not merely curiosity. It was intent, purpose, and danger. "They are coming," he said quietly, almost to himself. The maid's hand pressed against his side, steadying him. "Then we face them," she said, "together." Two distant howl answered the forest, one that made the wolf stiffen in recognition. Do it happened recognition. Another creature, one he had thought long gone, responded to the night. Its voice carried a haunting familiarity, an echo of the past, and the wolf froze. You hear it too," the maid whispered, sensing the change in him. "Yes," he said, voice low and tense. "And it is not friendly." The glade, once a haven, now felt like the edge of a precipice. The shadows deepened, the wind whispered threats, and the weight of the kingdom's fear pressed down upon them. Yet through it all, their bond held, fragile, untested, and powerful beyond reason. The wolf rose slowly, massive frame tense, golden eyes scanning the darkness. "We must move," he said, "before they come closer. Before the kingdom learns that I am not alone." The maid nodded, heart steady, hand brushing his fur.
I will follow you, she said.
Wherever you go. As they stepped into the deeper forest, the shadows shifted, hiding watchers and enemies alike. The distant howl grew louder, closer, a reminder that the world beyond their bond was neither forgiving nor kind. And in the silent dark, a voice whispered, carried on the wind, soft yet chilling. The Omega has touched him, but the shadow of the past will not forgive so easily. The wolf's ears twitched. The maid tightened her grip on his shoulder. The forest held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game that had only just begun. The forest was alive with shadows, deeper and more restless than ever before. The wolf moved with careful steps, muscles taut, ears swiveling at every rustle of leaves. The distant howls had grown louder, echoing like the memory of something he had tried to bury. A predator, older and darker than himself, calling him back to a past he feared to face. Beside him, the maid kept pace, her small hand brushing his fur. She could feel his tension, the weight of his history pressing against him like chains. Yet she did not falter. Her courage had grown stronger since their first encounter. Her fearlessness was no longer naive. It was tempered by understanding, by care, and by the fierce need to protect what she now knew was precious.
They are close, the wolf murmured, voice low and rumbling.
The creature from the old woods, it has returned. It remembers me, and it remembers what I lost. I will not let it harm you, the maid said softly. We face it together. He looked down at her, golden eyes flickering with a mixture of awe and doubt. I have caused death, pain. Even in human form, I may not be able to protect you. You are not alone, she interrupted gently. And you do not have to be perfect. You only have to survive and trust me. For the first time in centuries, he allowed himself to be guided by someone other than instinct. She led him through the forest paths that few dared to tread, weaving between ancient trees and over silvered streams. The night sky above was broken by slivers of moonlight casting pale light on their journey. Soon, they reached the sacred grounds, a place older than the kingdom itself, where the curse had first been cast. The air shimmered with magic, thick and tangible as though the land itself remembered the sorrows of centuries. Stones carved with runes, worn and ancient, marked the circle at the center. Here, the wolf's transformation had begun long ago, and here, perhaps, it could end. You must confront it, he said, voice tight. The curse, the sorceress, they will test you. It will not be easy.
I am not afraid, the maid replied, stepping closer to him. Not of the curse.
Not of you. Only of losing what we have built together. The wolf's jaw flexed, teeth catching the moonlight. His heart, long weighed with solitude, felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Not the hollow hope of longing, but the fragile, trembling hope that someone could walk beside him through darkness and come out unbroken. A sudden chill swept over the sacred circle. The wind whispered through the stones, carrying voices of the past, echoes of sorrow and rage. And then, from the shadows, the predator emerged. It was massive, older, and darker than the wolf. A creature born from the same curse, the same magic, a reflection of what he could have become if despair had consumed him entirely. You return, the wolf growled, stance low, muscles coiled. I thought I had left you behind. You cannot leave what is part of you, the predator hissed, eyes glowing like embers. You will join me or be destroyed. The wolf bared his teeth, body tensing. His claws dug into the ground, fur bristling. Not while I stand with her, he growled, his gaze flicking to the maid. Her hand pressed to his side, grounding him, steadying him. I am with you, she said. And together we are stronger than fear, stronger than the curse. The predator lunged, shadows moving like living blades. The wolf met it head-on, roaring, muscles straining. The ground shook beneath them, and the air hummed with ancient magic. Yet the maid did not flee. She stepped into the circle of combat, her voice rising in chants of courage and protection, calling forth the hidden strength that had guided her all along. The wolf felt it, her power, not magical in the traditional sense, but a force older, woven from trust, courage, and love. It flowed into him, steadying his form, tempering the rage, sharpening the clarity of his mind. Together, they met the predator's attacks, countering with strength and precision. Wolf and human moving as one, bound not only by survival but by trust. The predator faltered, realizing too late that the bond between them was more potent than any curse, any magic, any fear it could summon. With a final surge, the wolf pressed forward, claws striking with controlled force, while the maid whispered words of release and mercy. The predator shrieked, a sound of despair and fury then dissolved into shadows, leaving only the echo of its howl behind. The wolf fell to his knees, panting, exhausted but alive. The maid knelt beside him, brushing hair from his sweat-streaked face, her hands warm and steady. "You did it," she whispered. "You survived. We survived." He looked at her, golden eyes softening, and for the first time the human part of him fully emerged. The beast still lingered, the muscles, the fur, the power, but now tempered by humanity, by understanding, by the bond they shared. "I could not have done it without you," he admitted, voice thick with emotion. "You saved me in ways no one else could."
"And you saved me," she said.
"By letting me see who you truly are. By trusting me, even when the world feared you." The sacred circle seemed to respond to their bond. Moonlight reflected off the stones, shimmering with ancient magic, soft and approving. The curse had not vanished entirely, but its hold had loosened. Where once he had been trapped by rage and despair, now he stood free, free to walk, free to trust, free to love. The journey back to the castle was quiet, yet filled with a profound sense of change. The forest seemed less threatening, the shadows less oppressive. Even the winds whispered softly, carrying the promise of renewal. When they arrived at the edge of the kingdom, dawn broke. The first light spilled over the hills, casting gold across the land. The wolf, once feared and hunted, stepped into the light with the maid at his side. No longer a creature of darkness alone, he was a being transformed, strong, proud, and yet gentle. The villagers, who had long whispered tales of the giant wolf, froze as they saw him. The maid stepped forward, hand clasping his, her courage steady. The wolf lowered his head, bowing slightly in acknowledgement, not as a beast, but as someone who had earned the respect of the living world. From the castle balcony, the nobles watched in shock and awe. The hunter, the shadowy figures, all had underestimated the bond between courage and trust, between human and beast. But even in triumph, a whisper lingered in the wind. The sorceress who had cast the original curse had not vanished entirely. Her magic had been diminished, but her presence lingered, a promise that the trials were not over. The wolf and the maid exchanged a glance, understanding the truth without words. Their story was far from finished. Yet for now, they had won. Together they had faced fear, darkness, and the shadows of the past. Together they had survived, and in surviving they had found something stronger than the curse, something deeper than fear. They had found each other. The wolf turned to the maid, golden eyes soft and unafraid. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." She smiled, the first true smile of dawn reflected in her eyes. "Together," she agreed. And as the sun rose over the kingdom, light spilling into valleys long steeped in shadow, the wolf and the maid walked forward. The curse that had defined centuries of fear and sorrow was broken, or at least weakened, and in its place grew hope, fragile, strong, and enduring. The wind carried their footsteps, whispering through the trees, across the hills, and into the hearts of the kingdom. It spoke of courage, of trust, of bonds that could survive even the darkest magic. And somewhere, far in the shadows, the sorceress watched, silent and calculating. Yet even her power, ancient and cruel, could not undo what had been forged between a human heart and a cursed soul. The forest exhaled, releasing the tension of centuries. The wolf lifted his head, eyes reflecting the morning light, fur shimmering gold and silver in the sun. The maid walked beside him, her hand in his, her heart steady. They had survived. They had endured. And they had been changed forever. The kingdom watched, astonished. A being once feared as a monster now stood tall, tempered by humanity and love. And beside him a maid, small, fearless, steadfast, had proven that courage could not be measured by size, status, or fear. As the day unfolded, the whispers of fear were replaced by whispers of hope. And though challenges remained and shadows of the past lingered, one truth was clear. When hearts dared to trust, when courage met despair, even the darkest curse could be challenged, and perhaps even overcome. The wolf and the maid paused on a hill overlooking the kingdom. Light touched their faces. He looked at her, and she looked back, and in that silent gaze lay everything: survival, redemption, and a bond that could not be broken. And for the first time in centuries, the wolf did not feel alone.